Alrighty. I say, as my streams appear to crash. Are they back? Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, there they are. Okay, nice. Cool. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggith, and today we're starting a new book um, in the form of Downbelow Station by C.J. Cherryh. I am not actually sure how her name is pronounced, if it's a hard CH or a soft CH. I don't actually know for sure. At any rate, I have hyped this book up, as I say in the stream description, as kind of being the linchpin of a lot of the Alliance Union setting. Not all of it. There's plenty of books that take place in that universe that um, barely even mention the events of Downbelow Station, but its impact is felt pretty broadly. Um, it is probably the books that are least affected, but even those feel it, are Heavy Time and Hellburner singular. Um, and even those the second of those can really only, the events there can really only be happening if the events on Downbelow Station are somewhat imminent. You'll know what I mean when we get there. It is going to be a bit of a slow burn. So, what can I say about this that won't spoil things? So we've had a bit of an introduction to the Earth situation. This will cover a lot of it. There is right at the very beginning. There's a basically a little history lesson that explains here's the basics of the setting, and then um, we kind of get into it. Uh, So in Hellburners, we knew that there was some degree of military buildup. We'd heard hints and rumors that Earth wanted to um, start doing certain things and consolidating. This book is kind of about that. Um, it does technically take place after Hellburner, but I don't think any of the characters are ever mentioned. There might actually be one or two that popped up, but they aren't main characters of Hellburner. Um, it sits on its own pretty well. It is vitally important for understanding why certain things have to be done a certain way in later books, um, and that is something that will make sense later. This is saying it's only like 500 pages. I could have sworn it was longer. It feels longer. Let me real quick set out and black it out a bit of how much I want to get through. How long is chapter 2? It's pretty long. It is Cherry with a hard CH. Okay, CJ Cherry. I will remember that. Thank you very much, Nicole Berlino. I appreciate that. Chapter 2 is pretty quick. Let's get through chapter 3. See how long chapter 4 is. Let's get through chapter 4, and we'll go from there, see how we're doing. Like the fruit. Or is it a berry? I can't remember what cherries are. I don't think it's a berry, because berries usually have more seeds, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. She does have an author's intro. Let me skim that real quick. Um, and see if that like spoils anything. I don't think it will. No, it doesn't. She does mention by name Merchanter's Luck, which is I'd call it novel length. It's not terribly long. I do want to get around to reading that one. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. That one's a ride. Um, yeah, I'll start with her introduction. Actually, I'll do that outside of my primary recording. One of the advantages of reading a book that was published first in 1981 is that there is plenty of cover art. So I've got lots of delightful cover art to share. Uh, as we go through all this. All right, so I will give her introduction as the introduction beyond what I've done. Introduction. I set out to write a small book, which turned out to be Merchanter's Luck, but I wanted a wider backdrop, a universe that would be consistent from book to book, a universe to satisfy all those readers that love to detect connections. So I gave up on the small book for a while and began to develop the wider picture, a view of life a few centuries from now, a few centuries into starflight. I predict that it won't take us leaving the solar system to create differences between spacefarers and devout groundlings. One tribe moves out and one tribe stays. History broadens, the philosophy shifts, develops a rift, splits one population from the other, and a schism happens, minor or major. It's the way humankind has always proliferated. We go over the next hill, live a few hundred years, change our languages to accommodate things we never saw before, and before we know it, our cousins think we have an accent. Or we think they have a strange attitude. And we don't really understand our cousins any longer. Well, that story turned out to be a longer book than I thought, and complex. Human beings don't change their worldview easily. No one's wholly right or ultimately evil. They're former friends. They have families, love their kids, well, and in this advanced age differ in some very fundamental ways. Questionable people sometimes do good things. Good ones sometimes do great damage. It is, in other words, a human story. It was the book that persuaded me computers were, I can't flip pages. It was the book that persuaded me computers were better than typewriters. Cutting and pasting was at its very limit with this one. It was also a book that defied size limits for the market of the day, and seeing how long it was getting, I took out all the transitional and descriptive bits in a final edit, intending to keep it small. Don Walheim, founder of Daw Books, the man who brought my first book, read it and sent me back to put all those bits back in. But at the same time, and to make my life much, much easier, Betsy Walheim came up with the headings that made the scene changes work. But needing to know the times more precisely, I set about to make the multiple clocks in the story actually agree. This involved a lot of cardboard wheels and provided more persuasion that computers might be a good thing. When I sent the book back, it was still large and shaggy with pasted inserts. Duplication in those days was no cinch, and not cheap, ranging up to a dime a page, and I had nightmares of having the book lost in the mails on its way. It did get there safely. And as for size, Daw created a new size category to make it possible to publish the book uncut and without resort to series format. Without resorting to series format, which would have weakened it disastrously. For all these considerations, I am extremely grateful. The book, with its transitions and descriptions reinserted and those inventive headers installed, won the Hugo Award for Best Novel of that year, and for that I am more than grateful to my publishers. The story set the scene for Merchanter's Luck, no question. I had no trouble fitting that novel and its situation into the time frame and history I'd created. And I found that complex history a very good thing to have done for very many reasons. The universe I set up gives me endless ideas for other stories. Understand, the stars I write about are real places. In creating my map, I looked not at the apparent nearness of our celestial neighbors, but at the real position relative to our sun, and decided that Alpha Centauri, though nearby, wasn't the best path for people getting to the stars. I went instead a little to celestial east, taking the sun as central and Castor and Pollux as sort of north, and I selected a set of insignificant stars that lie near enough to each other to serve as a highway of way stops on the route to another truly interesting star, Tau Ceti, which is Pell, by the way, as Ep Eri is Viking, and so on. I worked out my distances and adopted a reasonable territory for a young interstellar civilization, and in doing that, I created trade routes and more history. So, if you look up at night toward the Whale and the Great River, those of you who can find that view at night, you can see the very places I write about. And if you do see a bright flash out there, do tell me. Some of these people are armed and dangerous. But space is wide. You don't need the whale and the river. If you look up at any two starry points of light in your own sky, you can very easily think of ships going between them, and those ships full of life and commerce, each ship with its own story, maybe human and maybe not. People ask where writers get ideas. Take my advice. Some cool, clear night, drive to a country place where city lights don't block your view. Turn off the car lights. Get out and look up and see our real neighborhood. C.J. Cherryh, May 2001. I am reading from a 2001 edition. I don't actually have the cover art for that, which is odd. I don't remember which edition the cover art I have is from. Um, but it uses that art. That artwork, by the way, is by one David Mattingly, who, if you are into 80s sci-fi novels um, and anything adjacent to that, odds are you probably saw cover art by this guy. Um, he has done a lot. He did a ton of the old Star Trek novels. Um, I think he's even done a couple of the other CJ Cherryh books. I think he worked on some of the BattleTech cover art at one point, although I don't see any obvious giant robots. Um, but he's done a lot. He's very prolific. Anyway, with that introduction out of the way, I will get cracking and we'll start reading this book. Incidentally, this is another one where it would be really good if I could put like a list of dramatis personae somewhere, like on the Discord maybe. I haven't done that for any of the books I said I was going to do that for. So maybe this will be the one that does it, because this has a pretty big cast. And we're going to get introduced to new characters somewhat frequently. So there's a lot to keep track of, and for that I apologize. Downbelow Station by C.J. Cherryh. Book 1. Chapter 1. Earth and Outward, 2005 to 2352. The stars, like all man's other ventures, were an obvious impracticality, as rash and improbable an ambition as the first venture of man onto Earth's own great oceans, or into the air, or into space. Sol Station had existed profitably for some years. There were beginnings of mines, the manufactories and power installations in space which were beginning to pay. Earth took them for granted as quickly as it did all its other comforts. Missions from the station explored the system, a program far from public understanding, but it met no strong opposition, since it did not disturb the comfort of Earth. So quietly, very matter-of-factly, that first probe went out to the two nearest stars, unmanned, to gather data and return, a task in itself of considerable complexity. The launch from station drew some public interest, but years was a long time to wait for a result, and it passed out of media interest as quickly as it did out of the solar system. It drew a great deal more attention on its return, nostalgia on the part of those who recalled its launch more than a decade before, curiosity on the part of the young who had known little of its beginning and wondered what it was all about. It was a scientific success, bringing back data enough to keep the analysts busy for years. but there was no glib, slick way to explain the full meaning of its observations in layman's terms. In public relations, the mission was a failure. The public, seeking to understand on their own terms, looked for material benefit, treasure, riches, dramatic findings. What the probe had found was a star with reasonable possibilities for encouraging life. A belt of debris, including particles, planetoids, irregular chunks somewhat under planet size with interesting implications for systemic formation, and a planetary companion with its own system of debris and moons. A planet desolate, baked, forbidding. It was no Eden, no second Earth, no better than what existed in the sun's own system, and it was a far journey to have gone to find that out. The press grappled with questions it could not easily grasp itself, sought after something to give the viewers, lost interest quickly. If anything, there were questions raised about cost, vague and desperate comparisons offered to Columbus, and the press hared off quickly onto a political crisis in the Mediterranean, much more comprehensible and far bloodier. The scientific establishment on Sol Station breathed a sigh of relief, and with equal quiet caution, invested a portion of its budget in a modest manned expedition to voyage in what amounted to a traveling miniature of Sol Station itself, and to stay a time making observations in orbit about that world. And very quietly, to further imitate Sol Station, to test manufacturing techniques which had built Earth's great second satellite, in stranger conditions. In stranger conditions. There we go. Sol Corporation supplied a generous grant, having a certain curiosity, a certain understanding of stations and what profits could be looked for from their development. That was the beginning. The same principles which had made Sol Station practical made the first star station viable. It needed a bare minimum of supply in biostuffs from Earth, mostly luxuries to make life more pleasant for the increasing number of techs and scientists and families stationed there. It mined, and as its own needs diminished, would send back the surplus of its ores. So, the first link in the chain was made. No need at all, that first colony had proven, that a star have a world friendly to humans. No need even for a moderate sun-type star. Just the solar wind and the usual accompanying debris of metals and rock and ice. One station built, a station module could be... huh. One station built, a station module could be hauled to the next star, whatever it was. Okay. One station built, a station module could be hauled to the next star, whatever it was. Scientific bases, manufacture, bases from which the next hopeful star could be reached, and the next, and the next, and the next. Earth's outward exploration developed in one narrow vector, one little fan which grew at its broader end. Sol Corporation, swollen beyond its original purpose and holding more stations than Sol itself, became what the star stationers called it, the Earth Company. It wielded power, certainly over the stations which it directed long distance, years removed in space, and power on Earth, too, where its increasing supply of ores, medical items, and its possession of several patents were enormously profitable. Slow as the system was in starting, the steady arrival of goods and new ideas, however long ago launched, was profit for the company and consequent power on Earth. The company sent merchant carriers in greater and greater numbers. That was all it needed to do now. The crews which manned those ships on the long flights grew into an inward turned and unique way of life, demanding nothing but improvement of equipment, which they had come to think of as their own. Station in turn supported station, each shifting Earth's goods a step further on to its nearest neighbor, and the whole circular exchange ending up back on Sol Station, where the bulk of it was drained off in high rates charged for biostuffs and such goods as only Earth produced. Those were the great good days for those who sold this wealth. Fortunes rose and fell, governments did, corporations took on more and more power, and the Earth Company in its many guises reaped immense profits and moved the affairs of nations. It was an age of restlessness. Newly industrialized populations and the discontents of every nation set out on that long, long track in search of jobs, wealth, private dreams of freedom, the old lure of the New World. Human patterns recapitulated across a new and wider ocean to stranger lands. Saul Station became a stepping off place, no longer exotic, but safe and known. The Earth Company flourished, drinking in the wealth of the star stations, another comfort which those who received it began to take for granted. And the star stations clung to the memory of that lively, diverse world which had sent them, Mother Earth in a new and emotion-fraught connotation, she who sent out precious stuffs to comfort them, comforts which in a desert universe reminded them that there was at least one living mote. The Earth Company ships were the lifeline, and the Earth Company probes were the romance of their existence, the light, swift exploration ships which let them grow more selective about next steps. It was the age of the Great Circle, no circle at all, but the course which the Earth Company freighters ran in constant travel, the beginning and end of which was Mother Earth. Star after star after star, 9 of them, until Pell, which proved to have a livable world and life. That was the thing which cancelled all bets, upset the balance forever. Pell's star and Pell's world, named for a probe captain who had located it, finding not alone a world, but indigenes, natives. Indigenes, sorry. Where's that pronounced? Indigenes. No, indigenes is IES, I think. Indigenes, natives. It took a long time for word to travel the great circle back to Earth, less for word of the find to get to the nearer star stations. And more than scientists came flocking to Pell's world. Local station companies who knew the economics of the matter came rushing to the star, not to be left behind. Population came, and 2 of the stations orbiting less interesting stars nearby were dangerously depleted, ultimately to collapse altogether. In the burst of growth and the upheaval of building a station at Pell, ambitious people were already casting eyes toward 2 farther stars, beyond Pell, calculating with cold foresight, for Pell was itself a source of Earth-like goods, luxuries, a potential disturbance in the directions of trade and supply. For Earth, as word rode in with arriving freighters, a frantic haste to ignore Pell. Alien life. It sent shockwaves through the company, touched off moral debates and policy debates in spite of the fact that the news was almost 2 decades old, as if they could set hand now to whatever decisions were being made out there in the beyond. It was all out of control. Other life. It disrupted man's dearly held ideas of cosmic reality. It raised philosophical and religious questions, presented realities some committed suicide rather than face. Cults sprang up. But, other arriving ships reported, the aliens of Pell's world were not outstandingly intelligent, nor violent, built nothing, and looked more like lower primates than not, brown-furred and naked with large, bewildered eyes. Ah, earthbound man sighed. The human-centered, earth-centered universe in which Earth had always believed had been shaken, but quickly righted itself. The isolationists who opposed the company gathered influence and numbers in reaction to the scare, and to a sudden and marked drop in trade. The company was in chaos. It took long to send instructions, and Pell grew out of the company's control. New stations unauthorized by Earth Company sprang into existence at farther stars, stations called Mariner and Viking, and they spawned Russells and Esperance. By the time company instructions arrived down the line, bidding now stripped nearer stations take this and that action to stabilize trade, the orders were patent nonsense. In fact, a new pattern of trade had already developed. Pell had the necessary biostuffs. It was closer to most of the star stations. And star station companies, which had once seen Earth as beloved mother, now saw new opportunities and seized them. Still other stations formed. The Great Circle was broken. Some Earth Company ships kited off to trade with the new beyond, and there was no way to stop them. Trade continued, never what it had been. The value of Earth's goods fell, and consequently it cost Earth more and more to obtain the one-time bounty of the colonies. A second shock struck. Another world lay beyond, discovered by an enterprising merchanter, Cytene. Further stations developed. Fargon and Paradise and Wyatt's, and the Great Circle stretched farther still. The Earth Company took a new decision. A payback program, a tax of goods, which would make up recent losses. They argued to the stations of the community of man, the moral debt, and the burden of gratitude. Some stations and merchanters paid the tax. Some refused it, particularly those stations beyond Pell and Cytene. The company, they maintained, had had no part in their development and had no claim on them. There was a system of papers and visas instituted, and inspections called for, bitterly resented by the merchants who viewed their ships as their own. More, the probes were pulled back, tacit statement that the company was putting an official damper on further growth of the beyond. They were armed, the swift exploration ships, as they had always been, venturing as they did into the unknown, but now they were used in a new way, to visit stations and pull them into line. That was bitterest of all, that the crews of the probe ships, who had been the heroes of the beyond, became the company enforcers. Merchanters armed in retaliation, freighters never built for combat, incapable of tight turns. But there were skirmishes between the converted probe ships and rebel merchanters. Although most merchanters declared their reluctant consent to the tax. The rebels retreated to the outermost colonies, least convenient for enforcement. It became war without anyone calling it war. Armed company probes against the rebel merchanters, who served the farther stars, a circumstance possible because there was Cytene, and even Pell was not indispensable. So the line was drawn. The Great Circle resumed, exclusive of the stars beyond Fargon, but never so profitable as it had been. Trade continued across the line after strange fashion, for tax-paying merchanters could go where they would, and rebel merchanters could not, but stamps could be faked, and were. The war was leisurely, a matter of shots fired when a rebel was clearly available as a target. The company ships could not resurrect the stations immediately earthward of Pell, they were no longer viable. The populations drifted to Pell and Russells and Mariner and Viking, and to Fargon and farther still. Ships were built, as stations had been, in the beyond. The technology was there, and merchanters proliferated. Then, jump arrived. A theory originated in New Beyond, at Cytene, quickly seized upon by shipbuilders at Mariner on the company side of the line. And that was the third great blow to Earth. The old light-bound way of figuring was obsolete. Jump freighters skipped along in short transits into the between, But the time it took from star to star went from years to periods of months and days. Technology improved. Trade became a new kind of game, and strategy in the long war changed. Trade became a new kind of game, and strategy. Oh, sorry. Trade became a new kind of game, and strategy in the long war changed. Stations knit closer together. Suddenly, out of this, there was an organization among the rebels farthest beyond. It started as a coalition of Fargon and its mines. It swept to Cytene, gathered to itself Paradise and Wyatts, and reached for other stars and the merchanters who served them. There were rumors of vast population increases going on for years unreported. Technology once suggested on the company side of the line, when the need was for men, for human lives to fill up the vast dark nothingness, to work and to build. Cytene had been doing it. This organization, this union, as they called itself, as it called itself, bred and multiplied geometrically, using installations already in operation, birth labs. Union grew. It had, in the course of 2 decades, increased enormously in territory and population density. It offered a single unswerving ideology of growth and colonization, a focused direction to what had been a disorganized rebellion. It silenced dissent, mobilized, organized, pushed hard at the company. And in final, outraged public demand for results in the deteriorating situation, the Earth Company back on Sol Station gave up the tax, diverted that fund to the building of a great fleet, all jump ships, engines of destruction. Europe and America and all their deadly kindred. Europe and America in this case are names of ships. They're italicized. So was Union building, developing specialized warships, changing style as it changed technology. Rebel captains who had fought long years for their own reasons were charged with softness at the first excuse. Ships were put into the hands of commanders with the right ideology, with more ruthlessness. Company successes grew harder. The great fleet, outnumbered and with an immense territory to cover, did not bring an end to the war in a year or in 5 years. And Earth grew vexed with what had become an inglorious, exasperating conflict. Cut all the starships! The cry was now in the financing corporations. Pull back our ships and let the bastards starve. It was, of course, the company fleet which starved. Union did not, but Earth seemed incapable of understanding that it was no longer a question of fragile colonies in rebellion, but of a forming power, well fed, well armed. The same myopic policies, the same tug of war between isolationists and company which had alienated the colonies in the first place, drew harder and harder lines as trade diminished. They lost the war not in the beyond, but in the Senate chambers and the boardrooms on Earth and Sol Station, going for mining within Earth's own system, which was profitable, and devil take the exploratory missions in any direction at all, which were not. Profitable, that is. No matter that they had jump now and that the stars were near. Their minds were geared to the old problems and to their own problems and their own politics. Earth banned further emigration, seeing the flight of its best minds. It weltered in economic chaos, and the drain of Earth's natural resources by the stations was an easy focus of discontent. No more war, they said. Peace suddenly became good politics. The company fleet, deprived of funds in a war in which it was engaged on a wide front, obtained supplies where and as it could. In the end they were patchwork, 15 carriers out of the once proud 50, cobbled together at the stations still open to them. Mazian's Fleet, they called it, in the tradition of the Beyond, where ships were so few at first that enemies knew each other by name and reputation. A recognition less common now, but some names were known. Conrad Mazian of Europe was a name Union knew to its regret. And Tom Edger of Australia was another, and Mika Kreshov of Atlantic, and Signe Mallory of Norway, and all the rest of the company captains, down to those of the riderships. They still served Earth and the company, with less and less love of either. None of this generation was Earthborn. They received few replacements. None from Earth, none from the stations in their territory either, for the stations feared obsessively for their neutrality in the war. Merchanters were their source of skilled crew and of troops, most of them unwilling. The Beyond had once begun with the stars nearest Earth, and now it started with Pal, for the oldest stations were all shut down as earthward trade phased out and the pre-jump style of trade passed forever. The hinder stars were all but forgotten, unvisited. There were worlds beyond Pell, beyond Cytene, and Union had them all now, real worlds of the far-between stars which Jump could reach, where Union used the birth labs still to expand populations, giving them workers and soldiers. Union wanted all the beyond to direct what would be the course of the future of man. Union had the beyond, and Union had the beyond, all but the thin arc of stations which Mazian's fleet still thanklessly held for Earth and the company, because they had once been set to do that, because they saw nothing they could do but that. At their backs was only Pell, and the mothballed stations of the hinder stars. Remoter still, isolate, sat Earth, locked in its inner contemplations and its complex, fragmented politics. No trade of substance came out of Sol now, or to it. In the insanity which was the war, free merchanters plied Union side and company stars alike, crossed the battle lines at will, although Union discouraged that traffic by subtle harassments, seeking to cut a company supply. Union expanded, and the company fleet just held on, worldless but for Pell which fed them, and Earth which ignored them. On Union side, stations were no longer built on the old scale. They were mere depots for worlds now, and probes sought still further stars. They were generations. They were generations which had never seen Earth. Humans to whom Europe and Atlantic were creatures of metal and terror. Generations whose way of life was stars, infinities, unlimited growth, and time which looked to forever. Earth did not understand them. But neither did the stations which remained with the company, or the free merchanters who carried on that strange cross-lines trade. Chapter 2. 1. In approach to Pell, 5-2-52. The convoy winked in, the carrier Norway first, and then the 10 freighters. More, as Norway loosed her 4 riders and the protective formation spread itself wide in its approach to Pell's star. Here was refuge, one secure place the war had never yet reached, but it was the lapping of the tide. The worlds of the far beyond were winning, and certainties were changing, on both sides of the line. On the bridge of the ECS-5, the jump carrier Norway, there was rapid activity, the 4 auxiliary command boards monitoring the riders, the long aisle of comm operations and that of scan and that of their own command. Norway was in constant comm link with the 10 freighters, and the reports passed back and forth on those channels were terse, ship's operations only. Norway was too busy for human disasters. No ambushes. The station at Pellsworld received signal and gave reluctant welcome. Relief whispered from post to post of the carrier, private, not carried on intership comm. Signe Mallory, Norway's captain, relaxed muscles she had not known were tense, and ordered arms comp downgraded to standby. She held command over this flock, third captain in seniority of the 15 of Mazian's fleet. She was 49. The Beyonder Rebellion was far older than that, and she had been freighter pilot, rider captain, the whole gamut, all in the Earth Company's service. Her face was still young. Her hair was silver gray. The rejuve treatments which caused the gray kept the rest of her at somewhere near biological 36. And considering what she shepherded in and what it portended, she felt aged beyond the 49. A side note, and part of why she needed some big calendar wheels, is time is a bit different. Uh, at least in the era before they have jump, because it takes so long for news to travel anywhere. So you've got uh, relativity to contend with. That's less of an issue here, but it is going to come up once or twice, as I recall. It's why things sort of seem to have exploded pretty quickly in terms of the setting, mostly because of jump. She leaned back in her cushion, which looked over the upcurving, narrow aisles of the bridge, punched in on her arm console to check operations, stared out over the active stations and the screens which showed what vid picked up and what scan had. Safe. She lived by never quite believing such estimations. And by adapting. They all did, all of them who fought this war. Norway was like her crew, varied salvage. Of Brazil and Italia and Wasp and jinxed Miriam B, parts of her dating all the way back to the days of the freighter war. They took what they could, gave up as little as possible. As from the refugee ships she guided under her protection. There had been in decades before a time of chivalry in the war, of quixotic gestures, of enemy rescuing enemy and parting under truce. They were human, and the deep was wide, and they had all known it. No more. From among these civilians, neutrals, she had extracted the useful ones for herself, a handful who might adapt. There would be protests at Pell. It would do them no good. No protests would on this or other matters. The war had taken another turn, and they were out of painless choices. They moved slowly, at the crawl which was the best the freighters could manage in real space. Distance Norway or the riders, unencumbered, could cross pushing light. They had come in dangerously close to the mass of Pell's star, out of the plane with the system, risking jump accident and collisions. It was the only way these freighters could make haste, and lives rode on making time. Receiving approach instructions from Pell, Com told her. Graf, she said to her lieutenant, take her in. And punching in another channel, Die, put all troops on standby, full arms and gear. She switched back to Com. Advise Pell it had better evacuate a section and seal it. Tell the convoy if anyone breaks formation during approach, we'll blow them. Make them believe it. Got it, Com Senior said, and in due time, Station Master's on in person. The station master protested. She had expected so. You do it, she told him. Angelo Constantin, of the Constantins of Pell.
You clear that section, or we do. You start now. Strip out everything of value or hazard, down to the walls. And you put those doors on lock and weld the access panels shut. You don't know what we're bringing you. And if you delay us, I may have a shipload dead. Hansford's life support is going. You do it, Mr. Constantine, or I send the troops in. And you don't do it right, Mr. Constantine, and you have refugees scattered like vermin all over your station, with no IDs and ugly desperate. Forgive my bluntness. I have people dying in their own filth. We number 7,000 frightened civs on these ships, what left Mariner and Russell Starr. They're out of choices and out of time. You're not going to tell me no, sir.
There was a pause, distance, and more than enough delay for distance. "We've sounded the evacuation for sections of Yellow and Orange, Dock, Captain Mallory. Medical services will be available, all that we can spare. Emergency crews are moving. We copy regarding sealing of the affected areas. Security plans will be set in motion at once. We hope that your concern is as great for our citizens. This station will not permit the military to interfere in our internal security operations or to jeopardize our neutrality, but assistance under our command will be appreciated. Over." Signy relaxed slowly, wiped sweat from her face, drew an easier breath.
Assistance will be given, sir. Estimated docking 4 hours, if I delay this convoy all I can. I can give you that much time to get ready. Has news about Mariner gotten to you yet? It was blown, sir. Sabotage. Over.
"We copy 4 hours. We appreciate the measures you urge us to take, and we are taking them in earnest. We are distressed to hear about the Mariner disaster. Request detailed briefing. Further advise you we have a company team here at the moment. It's highly distressed at these proceedings." She breathed an obscenity into the calm. "And they're demanding to have all of you turned down for some other station. My staff is attempting to explain to them the condition of the ships and the hazard to life aboard them, but they're putting pressure on us. They consider Pell's neutrality threatened. Kindly appreciate that in your approach and bear in mind that the company agents have requested contact with you in person. Over." She repeated the obscenity, expelled a breath. The fleet avoided such meetings when possible, rare as they were in the last decade.
Tell them I'm busy. Keep them off the docks and out of our area. Do they need pictures of starving colonists to take back with them? Bad press, Mr. Constantine. Keep them out of our way. Over.
"They're armed with government papers, Security Council. That kind of company team. They have rank to use, and they're demanding transport deeper beyond. Over." She chose a second obscenity and swallowed it.
Thank you, Mr. Constantine. I'll capsule you my recommendations on procedures with the refugees. They've been worked out in detail. You can, of course, ignore them, but I'd advise against it. We can't even guarantee you that what we're disembarking on Pell isn't armed. We can't get among them to find out. Armed troops can't get in there, you understand? That's what we're giving you. I'd advise you keep the company boys out of our docking area entirely before we have hostages to deal with. Copy? End transmission."
"We copy. Thank you, Captain. End transmission." She slumped in place, glared at the screens, and shot an order to calm to capsule the instructions to station command. Company men. And refugees from lost stations. Information kept coming steadily from stricken Hansford, with a calm on the part of its crew she admired. Strictly procedures. They were dying over there. Crew was sealed into command and armed, refusing to abandon ship, refusing to let a rider take Hansford in tow. It was their ship. They stayed by it and did what they could for those aboard, by remote. They had no thanks from the passengers who were tearing the ship apart, or had been doing so until the air fouled and the systems began to break down. 4 hours.
2. Norway. Russells had met disaster, and Mariner. Rumor ran through the station's corridors, aboil with the confusion and anger of residents and companies that had been turned out with all their property. Volunteers and native workers aided in the evacuation. Dock crews used the loading machinery to move personal belongings out of the areas selected for quarantine, tagging items and trying not to confuse them or allow pilferage. Com echoed with announcements.
Residents of Yellow 1 through 119 are asked to send a representative to the emergency housing desk. There is a lost child at the aid station. May Turner. Will a relative please come at once to the aid station? Latest estimates from Station Central indicate housing available in guest residency, 1,000 units. All non-residents are being removed in favor of permanent station residents, priority to be determined by lottery. Apartments available by condensation of occupied units, 92.
Compartments available for emergency conversion to residential space, 2,000, including public meeting areas and some main day/alter day rotation of occupancy. The station council urges any person with personal arrangements possible through. What the blank? I skipped a line. The station council urges any person with personal arrangements possible through lodging with relatives or friends to secure same and to key this information to comp at the earliest possible. Housing on private initiative will be compensated to the home resident at a rate equivalent to per capita expense for other housing. We are 500 units deficient, and this will require barrack-style housing for on-station residency or transfer on a temporary basis for down-below residency, unless this deficiency can be made up by volunteering of housing or willingness of individuals to share assigned living space. Plans are to be considered immediately for residential use of Section Blue, which should free 500 units within the next 180 days. Thank you. Will a security team please report to 8 Yellow? So, from that one long PA announcement, you get the sense that space is having to shuffle space around is kind of a big deal. It's really well handled. It kind of beats you over the head with it, but it's well done. It's like, yes, let's reinforce that this is a bit of an issue. It was a nightmare. Damon Constantin stared at the flow of printout and intermittently paced the matted floors of Dock Command Blue Sector, above the area of the docks where techs tried to cope with the logistics of evacuation. 2 hours left. He could see from the series of windows the chaos all along the docks where personal belongings had been piled under police guard. Everyone and every installation in yellow and orange sectors 9th through 5th levels had been displaced. Dockside shops, homes, 4,000 people crowded elsewhere. The influx spilled past blue, around the rim to green and white, the big main residence sectors. Crowds milled about, bewildered and distraught. They understood the need. They moved. Everyone on station was subject to such transfers of residence, for repairs, for reorganizations, but never on this kind of notice, and never on this scale, and never without knowing where they were to be assigned. Plans were cancelled, 4,000 lives upset. Merchanters of the 2 score freighters which happened to be in dock had been rudely ousted from sleepover accommodations, and security did not want them on the docks or near the ships. His wife, Eleni? Elene. Let's go with Eileen. His wife, Eileen, was down there in a knot of them, a slim figure in pale green. Liaison with the merchanters. That was Eileen's job, and he was at her office fretting about it. He nervously watched the manner of the merchanters, which was angry, and meditated sending station police down there for Eileen's protection. But Eileen seemed to be matching them shout for shout, all lost in the soundproofing and the general buzz of voices and machine noise which faintly penetrated the elevated command post. Suddenly there were shrugs, and hands offered all around, as if there had been no quarrel at all. Some matter was either settled or postponed, and Eileen walked away and the merchanters strode off through the dispossessed crowds, though with shakes of their heads and no happiness evident. Eileen had disappeared beneath the slanted windows. To the lift, to come up here, Damon hoped. Off in Green section, his own office was dealing with an angry resident protest, and there was the company delegation fretting in Station Central, making demands of its own on his father. Will a medical team please report to Section 8 Yellow? Com asked silkily. Someone was in trouble, off in the evacuated sections. The lift doors opened into the command center. Eileen joined him, her face still flushed from argument. Central's gone stark mad, she said. The merchanters were moved out of hospice and told they had to lodge on their ships, and now they've got station police between them and their ships. They're wanting to cast off from station. They don't want their ships mobbed in some sudden evacuation. Read it that they'd just as soon be out of Pell's vicinity entirely at the moment. Mallory's been known to recruit merchanters at gunpoint. What did you tell them? To stand fast and figure there are going to be some contracts handed out for supplies and to take care of this influx. But they won't go to any ship that bolts the dock or that tangles with our police. And that has the lid on them, at least for a while. Eileen was afraid. It was clear behind the brittle, busy calm. They were all afraid. He slipped his arm about her. Hers fitted his waist, and she leaned there, saying nothing. Merchanter, Eileen Quen, off the freighter Estelle, which had gone its way to Russell's and to Mariner. She had missed that run for him, and to consider tying herself to a station for good, for his sake. And now she ended up trying to reason with angry crews who were probably right and sensible in her eyes, with the military in their laps. He viewed matters in a cold, quiet panic, stationer's fashion. Things which went wrong on station went wrong sitting still, by quadrants and by sections, and there was a certain fatalism bred of it. If one was in a safe zone, one stayed there. If one had a job which could help, one did it. And if it was one's own area in trouble, one still sat fixed. It was the only heroism possible. A station could not shoot, could not run, could only suffer damage and repair it if there was time. Merchanters had other philosophies and different reflexes in times of trouble. It's all right, he said, tightening his arm briefly. He felt her answering pressure. It's not coming here. They're just putting civilians far behind the lines. They'll stay here till the crisis is over and then go back. If not, we've had big influxes before when they shut down the last of the Hinder stars. We added sections. We'll do it again. We just get larger. Eileen said nothing. There were dire rumors drifting through the calm and down the corridors regarding the extent of the disaster at Mariner, and Estelle was not one of the incoming freighters. She knew that now for certain. She had hoped, when they had gotten the first news of the arrival, and feared, because there was damage reported on those ships out there, moving at freighters' slow pace, jammed with passengers they were never designed to handle, in the series of small jumps a freighter's limited range made necessary. It added up to days and days in real space as far as they had come in, and living hell on those vessels. There was some rumor they had not had sufficient drugs to get them through jump, and that some had made it without. He tried to imagine it, reckoned Eileen's worry. Estelle's absence from that convoy was good news and bad. Likely she had shied off her declared course, catching wind of trouble, and gone elsewhere in a hurry. Still cause for anxiety, with the war heating up out on the edge. A station. Gone. Blown. Russell's evacuating personnel. The safe edge was suddenly much too close, much too fast. It's likely, he said, wishing that he could save the news for another day, but she had to know, that we'll be moved to Blue, into maybe cramped quarters. The clean clearance personnel are the ones that can be transferred to that section. We'll have to be among the ones to go. She shrugged. That's all right. It's arranged? It will be. A second time she shrugged. They lost their home, and she shrugged, staring at the windows onto the docks below, and the crowds, and the merchanter ships. It's not coming here, he insisted, trying to believe it, for Pell was his home, in a way no merchanter was likely to understand. Constantins had built this place from the days of its beginning. Whatever the company losses, not Pell. And a moment later, moved by conscience if not by courage, I've got to get over there, onto the quarantine docks. 3. Norway eased in ahead of the others, with the hubbed, unsightly Taurus of Pell a gleaming sprawl in her vidscreens. The riders were fanned out, fending off the freighters for the moment. The merchanter crews in command of those refugee ships wisely held the line, giving her no trouble. The pale crescent of Pell's world, down below in Pell's matter-of-fact nomenclature, hung beyond the station, swirled with storms. They matched up with Pell Station's signal, drawing even with the flashing lights on the area designated for their docking. The cone which would receive their nose probe glowed blue with the come-aheads. Section Orange, the distorted letters read on vid, beside a tangle of solar vanes and panels. Signy punched in a scan, saw things were where they ought to be on Pell's borrowed image. Oh, sorry. Signy punched in a scan. Oh my gosh. So CJ Cherryh has a particular way of writing um, that sometimes throws me when reading it aloud. It's not me ragging on her for it, because it's one of the things that I find most endearing. Is she conveys a lot of information in as few words as possible sometimes. It's staggering how much information she gives you all the time. Like just very incidental information. It's incredible how rich these books are. She's truly a genius, one of the all-time greats. I urge anyone to read some more of her work. Okay. Signy punched in scan, saw things where they ought to be on Pell's borrowed image. Constant chatter flowed from Pell Central and the ship channels, keeping a dozen techs busy at comm. They entered final approach, lost G gently as Norway's rotating inner cylinder, slung gutwise in its frame, slowed and locked to docking position, all personnel decks on the stations up and down. They felt other stresses magnified for a time, a series of reorientations. The cone loomed, easy dock, and they met the grapple, a dragging confirmation of the last slam of G. Opened accesses for Pell's dock crews, stable now, and solidly part of Pell's rotation. I'm getting it all quiet on dockside, Graff said. The station master's police are all over the place. Message, Com said. Pell Station Master to Norway. Request military cooperation with desks set up to facilitate processing as per your instructions. All procedures are as you requested, with the Station Master's compliments, Captain. Reply. Hansford coming in immediately with crisis on life support and possible riot conditions. Stay back of our lines. End it. Graff, take over operations. Di, get me those troops out on that dock double time. She left matters there, rose and strode back through the narrow bowed? 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 Through the narrow bowed aisles of the bridge. Bowed? Must be bowed, right? Yeah, because bow. Okay, sorry. You could actually read that either way, like if they're all hunched over. Sorry. They're aisles, though. The aisles are what are being described, so it's bowed, because they probably go in like a hemispherical. Sorry. There's so much good visual imagery that sometimes I have to revisualize what I'm reading and actually think about what I'm reading as opposed to just letting the words flow. I apologize. She left matters there, rose and strode back through the narrow bowed aisles of the bridge to the small compartment which served her as office and oftentimes sleeping quarters. She opened the locker there and slipped on a jacket, slipped a pistol into her pocket. It was not a uniform. No one in the fleet, perhaps, possessed a full regulation uniform. Supply had been that bad, that long. Her captain's circle on her collar was her only distinction from a merchanter. The troops were no better uniformed, but armored. That they kept in condition, at all costs. She hastened down via the lift into the lower corridor, proceeding amid the rush of troops Di Jans had ordered to the dock, combat rigged, through the access tube and out into the chill, wide spaces.
Oh, I actually have an image for this that I found. A lucky find, image-wise, but I have to find it, so you have to bear with me a minute. I think I listed it. Yes, here we go. So we've got this image here with Signe Mallory and someone else. Um, this is for this upcoming scene or another one much like it. Give me one moment here to find recently closed tabs. I think it'll be under. Okay, it's not there. Give me one moment here. This was a commissioned image. Here we go. And I'm trying to find the artist. By someone called Pyracantha. Um, and on their website, I'll post a link to the image and where they've got it right here in chat. It says C.J. Cherryh's Downbelow Station. Science fiction author C.J. Cherryh commissioned me to illustrate a scene from her book Downbelow Station with her main character, one of the main characters, as we'll find out, Signe Mallory, in a prominent place. I chose a scene at the beginning of the book where Mallory must keep order as a ship full of dying refugees docks at the station. The faces of Mallory and the accompanying station master were taken from a still from the film Stromboli, starring Ingrid Bergman. Bergman's face was modified slightly to look like Cherry. This painting was exhibited at the Boscone 1982 and there won Guest of Honor's Choice Award, one of the few professional awards I have ever gotten. The guest of honor was Donald Walheim, C.J. Cherryh's publisher. Down Below is acrylic on masonite board, 15 inches by 10 inches, February 1982. Click for larger view. So, when I can get information like that, I try to. I don't always succeed, but I thought it was a good one.
I should have maybe read that off after the scene, but you see what's coming. You have a fair idea of what's coming here, so it's not that big a deal. All right. Proceeding amid the rush of troops Dijans had ordered to the dock, combat rigged, through the access tube, and out into the chill, wide spaces. The whole dock was theirs, vast, upward curving perspective, section arches curtained by ceiling as the station rim curve swept leftward toward gradual horizon. On the right, a section seal was in use, stopping the eye there. The place was vacant of all but the dock crews and their gantries, and station security and the processing desks, and those were well back of Norway's area. There were no native workers, not here, not in this situation. Debris lay scattered across the wide dock, papers, bits of clothing, evidencing a hasty withdrawal. The dockside shops and offices were empty. The Niner corridor midway of the dock. Whoa. The Niner corridor midway of the dock showed likewise vacant and littered. Di Jans's deep bellow echoed in the metal girders overhead as he ordered troops deployed about the area where Hansford was coming in. Pell Dockers moved up. Signy watched and gnawed her lip nervously, glanced aside as a civ came up to her, youngish, darkly aquiline, bearing a tablet and looking like business in his neat blue suit. The plug she had in one ear kept advising her of Hansford's status, a constant clamor of bad news. "What are you?" she asked. Damon Constantine, Captain, from Legal Affairs. She spared a second look. A Constantine. He could be that. He could be that. Angelo had had 2 boys before his wife's accident. Legal Affairs, she said with distaste. I'm here if you need anything, or if they do. I've got a comlink with Central. There was a crash. Hansford made a bad dock, grated down the guidance cone, and shuddered into place.
Get her hooked up and get out!
Dye roared at the dock crews. No calm for him. Graf was ordering matters from Norway's command. Hansford's crew would stay sealed on their bridge, working debarkation by remote. Tell them walk out, she heard relayed from Graf. Any rush at troops will be met with fire. I'm pretty sure Graf was in Hellburner. I'm trying to remember what voice I used because that was years ago now. He's sadly not terribly important here. The hookups were complete. The ramp went into place.
Move!
Dye bellowed. I think it's die. It's just the letter D followed by the letter I. D-I. Could be die, it could be D. I don't know. I apologize. I should have really reread this before doing this. It's been a couple of years since I read it, so I apologize again. Dockers pelted behind the lines of troops. Rifles were leveled. The hatch opened, a crash up the access tube. A stench rolled out onto the chill of the dock. Inner hatches opened, and a living wave surged out, trampling each other, falling. They screamed and shouted and rushed out like madmen, staggered as a burst of fire went over their heads.
Hold it!
Dye shouted.
Sit down where you are and put your hands on your heads!
Some were sitting down already, out of weakness. Others sank down and complied. Okay, that was weird. I think somebody just rang a doorbell, but it was in an adjacent building. It was very loud. Where were we? Let's just take the paragraph from the top. Some were sitting down already, out of weakness. Others sank down and complied. A few seemed too dazed to understand, but came no farther. The wave had stopped. At Signy's elbow, Damon Constantine breathed a curse and shook his head. No word of laws from him. Sweat stood visibly on his skin. His station stared riot in the face. Collapse of systems. Hansford's death 10,000-fold. There were 100, maybe 150 living, crouched on the dock by the umbilical gantry. The ship's stench spread. A pump labored, flushing air through Hansford's systems under pressure. There were 1,000 on that ship. We're going to have to go in there, Signy muttered, sick at the prospect. Dye was moving the others one at a time. Oh my gosh. Dye was moving the others one at a time, passing them under guns into a curtained area where they were to be stripped, searched, scrubbed, passed on to the desks or to the medics. Baggage there was none, not with this group, nor papers worth anything. Need a security team suited up for a contamination area, she told young Constantine, and stretchers. Get us a disposal area prepared. We're going to vent the dead. It's all we can do. Have them ID'd as best you can. Fingerprints, photos, whatever. Every corpse passed out of here unidentified is future trouble for your security. Constantine looked ill. It's probably Constantine, but it's capital K Onstantin. So I'm going with Constantine. Constantine looked ill. That was well enough. So did some of her troops. She tried to ignore her own stomach. A few more survivors had made their way to the opening of the access, very weak, almost unable to get down the ramp. A handful. A scant handful. Lila was coming in, her approach begun in her crew's panic, defying instructions and Ryder's threats. She heard Graff's voice reporting it, activated her own mic. Stall them off. Clip a vein off them if you have to. We've got our hands full. Get me a suit out here. They found 78 more living, lying among the decomposing dead. The rest was cleanup, and no more threat. Signy passed decontamination, stripped off the suit, sat down on the bare dock, and fought a heaving stomach. A Civ aid worker chose a bad time to offer her a sandwich. She pushed it away, took the local herbal coffee, and caught her breath in the last of the processing of Hansford's living. The place stank now of antiseptic fogging. A carpet of bodies in the corridors. Blood. Dead. Hansford's emergency seals had gone into place during a fire. Some of the dead had been cut in two. Some of the living had broken bones from being trampled in the panic. Urine. Vomit. Blood. Decay. They had had closed systems, had not had to breathe it. The Hansford survivors had had nothing at the last but the emergency oxygen, and that had possibly been a cause of murder. Most of the living had been sealed into areas where the air had held out less fouled than the badly ventilated storage holds where most of the refugees had been crammed. Message from the station master, Com said into her ear, requesting the captain's presence in station offices at the earliest. No, she sent back shortly. They were bringing Hansford's dead out. There was some manner of religious service, assembly line fashion, some amenity for the dead, before venting them. Caught in Downbelow's gravity well, they would drift in that direction, eventually. She wondered vaguely whether bodies burned in falling. Likely, she thought. She had not much to do with worlds. She was not sure whether anyone had ever cared to find out. Lila's folk were exiting in better order. They pushed and shoved at the first, but they stopped it when they saw the armed troops facing them. Constantine intervened with useful service over the portable loudspeaker, talking to the terrified civs in stationers' terms and throwing stationers' logic in their faces, the threat of damage to fragile balances, the kind of drill and horror story they must have heard all their confined lives. Signy put herself on her feet again during the performance, still holding the coffee cup, watched with a calmer stomach as the procedures she had outlined began to function smoothly, those with papers to one area and those without to another, for photographing and ID by statement. The handsome lad from legal affairs proved to have other uses, a voice of ringing authority when it regarded disputed paper or confused station staff. Griffin's moving up on docking, Graff's voice advised her. Station advises us they're wanting back 500 units of confiscated housing based on Hansford's casualties. Negative, she said flatly. My respects to station command, but out of the question. What's the status on Griffin? Panicky. We've warned them. How many others are coming apart? It's tense everywhere. Don't trust it. They could bolt, any one of them. Maureen was one dead, coronary, another ill. I'm routing her in next. Station master asks whether you'll be available for conference in an hour. I pick up that the company boys are making demands to get into this area. Keep stalling. She finished the coffee, walked along the lines in front of Griffin's dock, the whole operation moving down a berth, for there was nothing left at Hansford's berth worth guarding. There was quiet from the processed refugees. They had the matter of locating their lodgings to occupy them, and the station's secure environment to comfort them. A suited crew stood by to move Hansford out. They had only 4 berths at this dock. Signy measured with her eye the space the station had allotted them, 5 levels of 2 sections and the 2 docks. Crowded, but they would manage for a while. Barracks could solve some of it, temporarily. Things would get tighter. No luxuries, that was certain. They were not the only refugees adrift. They were simply the first. And upon that knowledge she kept her mouth shut. It was Dinah that broke the peace. A man caught with weapons in scan, a friend who turned ugly on his arrest. 2 dead then, and sobbing, hysterical passengers afterward. Signy watched it, simply tired, shook her head, and ordered the bodies vented with the rest, while Constantine approached her with angry arguments. Martial law, she said, ending all discussion, and walked away. Sita, Pearl, Little Bear, Winifred. They came in with agonizing slowness, unloaded refugees and property, and the processing inches its way along. Signy left the dock then, went back aboard Norway, and took a bath. She scrubbed 3 times all over before she began to feel that the smell and the sights had left her. Station had entered altar day. Complaints and demands had fallen silent, at least for a few hours. Or, if there were any, Norway's altar day command fended them off her. There was comfort for the night, company of sorts, a leave-taking. He was another item of salvage from Russell's and Mariner, not for transport on the other ships. They would have torn him apart. He knew this, and appreciated matters. He had no taste for the crew either, and understood his situation. "You're getting off here," she told him, staring at him, who lay beside her. The name did not matter. It confused itself in her memory with others, and sometimes she called him by the wrong one, late, when she was half asleep. He showed no emotion at that statement, only blinked, indication that he had absorbed the fact. The face intrigued her. Innocence, perhaps. Contrasts intrigued her. Beauty did. "You're lucky," she said. He reacted to that the same way, as he reacted to most things. He simply stared, vacant and beautiful. They had played with his mind on Russell's. There was a sordidness in her sometimes, a need to deal wounds, limited murder to blot out the greater ones, to deal a little terrors to forget the horror outside. She had sometime nights with Graff, with Di, with whoever took her fancy. She never showed this face to those she valued, to friends, to crew. Only sometimes there were voyages like this one, when her mood was black. It was a common disease in the fleet, in the sealed worlds of ships without discharge, among those in absolute power. "Do you care?" she asked. He did not, and that was, perhaps, his survival. Norway remained, her troops visibly on duty on the dockside, the last ship berthed in quarantine. On the dock, the lights were still at bright noon, over lines which moved only slowly under the presence of the guns. Chapter 3 1. Pell 5-2A 52. The A means altar day, so it is altar day on Pell. At Pell. On the 2nd of May, 20-something 52. 2352? I think it's 2352. What? 2352, yes. Too many sights, too much of such things. Damon Constantine took a cup of coffee from one of the aid workers who passed the desk and leaned on his arm, stared out across the docks, and tried to rub the ache from his eyes. The coffee tasted of disinfectant, as everything here smelled of it, as it was in their pores, their noses, everywhere. The troops stayed on guard, keeping this little area of the dock safe. Someone had been knifed in Barracks A. No one could explain the weapon. They thought it had come from the kitchen of one of the abandoned restaurants on Dockside, a piece of cutlery unthinkingly left behind by someone who had never realized the situation. He found himself exhausted beyond sense. He had no answers. Station police could not find the offender in the lines of refugees which still wended their way out there across the docks, including inching along to housing desks. A touch descended on his shoulder. He turned an aching neck, blinked up at his brother. Emilio settled in the vacant chair next to him, hand still on his shoulder. Elder brother. Emilio was in Altar Day Central Command. It was Altar Day now, Damon realized muzzily. The wake-sleep worlds in which they two seldom met. Oh, gosh. That is clever. I'm going to read the sentence and then I'm going to read out. I'm going to break it down. The wake-sleep worlds in which they two seldom met on duty had gotten lapped in the confusion. So I'm going to break that down. The wake-sleep worlds, so it's wake-sleep. The wake-sleep worlds in which they two, meaning the number two, seldom met on duty, had gotten lapped, like you do in a race, in the confusion. Ah, I love the way that's written. I don't know why. Go home, Emilio said gently. My turn, if one of us has to be here. I promised Aline I'd send you home. She sounded upset. All right, he agreed, but he failed to move, lacking the volition or the energy. Emilio's hand tightened, fell away. I saw the monitors, Emilio said. I know what we've got here. Damon tightened his lips against a sudden rush of nausea, staring straight before him, not at refugees, but at infinity, at the future, at the undoing of what had always been stable and certain. Pell. Theirs. His and Aline's. His and Emilio's. The fleet took license on itself to do this to them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it, because the refugees were poured in too suddenly, and they had no alternatives ready. I've seen people shot down, he said. I didn't do anything. I couldn't. Couldn't fight the military. Dissent. Would have caused a riot. It would have taken all of us under. But they shot people for breaking a line. Damon, get out of here. It's my concern now. We'll work something out. We haven't any recourse. Only the company agents, and we don't need them involved. Don't let them into this. We'll handle it, Emilio said. There are limits. Even the fleet understands them. They can't jeopardize Pell and survive. Whatever else they do, they won't risk us. They have, Damon said, focused his eyes on the lines across the docks, turned a glance then on his brother, on a face the image of his own on a face the image of his own plus 5 years. We've gotten something I'm not sure we can ever digest. So when they shut down the Hinder Star. So when they shut down the Hinder. What the hell? Okay, so this sentence is this quote is written out kind of bafflingly, so I'm just going to read it as written. I'm not going to try and interpolate that. So when they shut down the Hinder Stars, we managed. 2 stations, 6,000 people reach us out of what, 50, 60,000? 50, 60,000? In Union hands, I'd surmise, Emilio muttered. We're dead with Mariner, no knowing what casualties there. Or maybe some got out in other freighters, went elsewhere. He leaned back in the chair, his face settled into morose lines. Father's probably asleep. Mother, too, I hope. I stopped by the apartment before I came. Father says it was crazy for you to come here. I said I was crazy, too, and I could probably clean up what you didn't get to. He didn't say anything, but he's worried. Get on back to Aline. She's been working the other side of this chaos, passing papers on the refugee merchanters. On the Passing papers on the refugee merchanters. She's been asking questions of her own. Damon, I think you ought to get home. Estelle. Apprehension hit through to him. She's hunting rumors. She went home. She was tired or upset. I don't know. She just said she wanted you to get home when you could. Something's come in. He pushed himself to his feet, gathered up his papers, realized what he was doing, pushed them at Emilio, and left in haste, past the guard point, into the chaos of the dock on the other side of the passage which divided man's station from quarantine. Native labor scurried out of his way, furred, skulking forms more alien by reason of the breather masks they wore outside their maintenance tunnels. They were moving equipage and cargo. Equipage? Equipage. Equipage. I'm sure I've had that question the last time I read this, but I can't remember.
It could be equipage. I don't actually know.
I'm going to go with equipage. Now I've lost my spot. Native labor scurried out of his way, furred, skulking forms more alien by reason of the breather masks they wore outside their maintenance tunnels. They were moving equipage and cargo and belongings in frantic haste, shrieked and shouted among themselves in insane counterpoint to the commands of human overseers. He took the lift over to Green, walked the corridor into their own residence area, and even this was littered with displaced belongings in boxes, a security guard dozing at his post among them. They were all over shift, particularly security. Damon passed him, turned a face to a belated and embarrassed challenge, walked to the door of the apartment. He keyed it open, saw with relief the lights on, heard the familiar rattle of plastic in the kitchen. "Helene?" He walked in. She was watching the oven, her back to him. She did not turn. He stopped, sensing disaster, another world amiss. The timer went off. She removed the plate from the oven, set it on the counter, turned, managed composure to look at him. He waited, hurting for her, and after a moment came and took her in his arms. She gave a short sigh. "They're gone," she said, and a moment later another short gasp and a release. "Blown with Mariner. Estelle's gone, with everyone aboard. No possible survivors. Sita saw her go. They couldn't get undocked. All those people trying to get aboard. Fire broke out, and that part of the station went, that's all. Exploded. Blew the nose shell off." 56 aboard. Father, mother, cousins, remoter relatives. A world unto itself, Estelle. He had his own, however damaged. He had a family. Hers was dead. She said nothing more, no word of grief for her loss or of relief to have been spared, to have stayed behind from the voyage. She gave a few more convulsive breaths, hugged him, turned, dry-eyed, to put a second dinner in the microwave. She sat down, ate, went through all the normal motions. He forced his own meal down, still with a disinfectant taint in his mouth, reckoning it clung all about him. He succeeded finally in catching her eyes looking at him. They were as stark as those of the refugees. He found nothing to say. He got up, walked around the table, and hugged her from behind. Her hands covered his. "I'm all right. I wish you'd called me." She let go his hands and stood up, touched his arm, a weary gesture. Looked at him suddenly, directly, with that same dark tiredness. "There's one of us left," she said. He blinked, perplexed, realized then that she meant the Quens. Estelle's folk. Merchanters owned names as stationers had a home. She was Quen. That meant something he knew. That meant something he knew he did not understand, in the months they had been together. Revenge was a merchanter commodity, he knew that, among folk where name alone was a property and reputation went with it. "I want a child," she said. He stared at her, struck with the darkness in her eyes. He loved her. She had walked into his life off a merchanter ship and decided to try station life, though she still spoke of her ship. 4 months. For the first time in their being together he had no desire for her, not with that look and Estelle's death and her reasons for revenge. He said nothing. They had agreed there would be no children until she knew for certain whether she could bear to stay. What she offered him might be that agreement. It might be something else. It was not the time to talk about it, not now, with insanity all about them. He simply gathered her against him, walked with her to the bedroom, held her through the long dark hours. She made no demands, and he asked no questions. Two. "No," the man at the operations desk said, without looking this time at the printout, and then with a weary impulse toward humanity. "Wait, I'll do another search. Maybe it wasn't posted with that spelling." Vasily Kresich waited, sick with terror, as despair hung all about this last forlorn gathering of refugees which refused to leave the desks on dockside, families and parts of families, who hunted relatives, who waited on word. There were 27 of them on the benches near the desk, counting children. He had counted. They had gone from station main day into alter day, and another shift of operators at the desk which was station's one extension of humanity toward them. And there was nothing more coming out of comp but what had been there before. He waited. The operator keyed through time after time. There was nothing. He knew that there was nothing by the look the man turned toward him. Of a sudden he was sorry for the operator, too, who had to sit out here obtaining nothing, knowing there was no hope, surrounded by grieving relatives, with armed guards stationed near the desk in case. Crescich sat down again, next to the family who had lost a son in the confusion. It was the same tale for each. They had loaded in panic, the guards more concerned for getting themselves onto the ships than for keeping order and getting others on. It was their own fault, he could not deny that. The mob had hit the docks, men forcing their way aboard who had no passes allotted to those critical personnel meant for evacuation. The guards had fired in panic, unsure of attackers and illegitimate passengers. Russell's Station had died in riot. Those in the process of loading had been hurried aboard the nearest ship at the last. Doors had been sealed as soon as the counters had reached capacity. Jen and Romy should have been aboard before him. He had stayed, trying to keep order at his assigned post. Most of the ships had gotten sealed in time. It was Hansford the mob had gotten wide open. Hansford, where the drugs had run out, where the pressure of lives more than the systems could bear had broken everything down and a shock-crazed mob had run riot. Griffin had been bad enough. He had gotten aboard well before the wave the guards had had to cut down. And he had trusted that Jen and Romy had made it into Lila. The passenger list had said that they were on Lila, at least what printout they had finally gotten in the confusion after launch. But neither of them had gotten off at Pell. They had not come off the ship. No one of those critical enough to be taken to Station Hospital matched their descriptions. They could not be impressed by Mallory. Jen had no skills Mallory would need, and Romy, somewhere the records were wrong. He had believed the passenger list, had to believe it, because there were too many of them that Shipcom could pass direct messages. Because there were too many of them that Shipcom could pass direct messages. Somebody else parse and translate that for me. He had believed the passenger list, had to believe it, because there were too many of them that Shipcom could pass direct messages. They had voyaged in silence. Jen and Romy had not gotten off Lila, had never been there. "They were wrong to throw them out in space," the woman nearest him moaned. "They didn't identify them. He's gone. He's gone. He must have been on the Hansford." Another man was at the desk again, attempting to check, insisting that Mallory's idea of impressed civilians was a lie. And the operator was patiently running another search, comparing descriptions, negative again.
He was there! The man shouted at the operator. He was on the list and he didn't get off and he was there!
The man was crying. Crescich sat numb. On Griffin, they had read out the passenger list and asked for IDs. Few had had them. People had answered to names which could not possibly be theirs. Some answered to two, to get the rations, if they were not caught at it. He had been afraid then, with a deep and sickly fear, but a lot of people were on the wrong ships, and one of them had then realized the situation on Hansford. He had been sure they were aboard. Unless they had gotten worried and gotten off to go look for him. Unless they had done something so miserably, horribly stupid, out of fear for love. Tears started down his face. It was not the likes of Jen and Romy who could have gotten onto Hansford, who could have forced their way among men armed with guns and knives and lengths of pipe. He did not reckon them among the dead of that ship. It was rather that they were still on Russell's Station, where Union ruled now. And he was here, and there was no way back. He rose, finally, and accepted it. He was the first to leave. He went to the quarters which were assigned him, the barracks for single men, who were many of them young, and probably many of them under false IDs, and not the techs and other personnel they were supposed to be. He found a cot unoccupied and gathered up the kit the supervisor provided each man. He bathed a second time. No bathing seemed enough, and walked back among the rows of sleeping, exhausted men, and lay down. There was mind wipe for those prisoners who had been high enough to be valuable and opinionated. Jen, he thought. Oh, Jen, and their son, if he were alive. To be reared by a shadow of Jen, who thought the approved thoughts and disputed nothing, liable to adjustment because she had been his wife. It was not even certain that they would let her keep Romy. There were state nurseries, which turned out Union soldiers and workers. He thought of suicide. Some had chosen that rather than board the ships for some strange place, a station which was not theirs. That solution was not in his nature. He lay still and stared at the metal ceiling, in the near dark, and survived, which he had done so far, middle-aged and alone, and utterly empty. Chapter 4. Pell, May 3rd, 2352. The tension set in at the beginning of main day, the first numb stirrings forth by the refugees to the emergency kitchens set up on the dock, the first tentative efforts of those with papers and those without to meet with station representatives at the desks and to establish rights of residency, the first awakening to the realities of quarantine. "We should have pulled out last shift," Graff said, reviewing the Dawn's messages, "while it was all still quiet." "Would now," Signy said, "but we can't risk Pell. If they can't hold it down, we have to. Call Station Council and tell them I'm ready to meet them now. I'll go to them. It's safer than bringing them out onto the docks." "Take a shuttle round the rim," Graff suggested, his broad face set in habitual worry. "Don't risk your neck out there with less than a full squad. They're less controlled now. All it takes is something to set them off." The proposal had merits. She considered how that timidity would look to Pell, shook her head. She went back to her quarters and put on what passed for dress uniform, the proper dark blue at least. When she went it was with Jans and a guard of 6 armored troopers, and they walked right across the dock to the quarantine checkpoint, a door and passage beside the huge intersection seals. No one tried to approach her, although there were some who looked as if they might want to try it, hesitating at the armed troops. She made the door unhindered, and was passed through, up the ramp and to another guarded door, then down onto the main part of the station, into the main part of the station. Sorry. After that, it was as simple as taking a lift through the varied levels and into the administrative section, blue upper corridor. It was a sudden change of worlds, from the barren steel of the docks and the stripped quarantine area into a hall tightly controlled by station security, into a glass-walled foyer with sound-deadening matting underfoot, where bizarre wooden sculptures met them with the aspect of a cluster of amazed citizenry. Art. Signy blinked and stared, bemused at this reminder of luxuries and civilizations. Forgotten things. Rumored things. Leisure to make and create what had no function but itself, as man had done, but himself. She had lived her whole life insulated from such things, only knowing at a distance that civilization existed, and that rich stations maintained luxury at their secret hearts. Only they were not human faces which stared out from curious squat globes among wooden spires, but faces round-eyed and strange. Down-below faces, patient work in wood. Humans would have used plastics or metal. There were indeed more than humans here. That fact was evident in the neat braided matting. Oh, there's a weird comma there. I'm going to read through this and then I'm going to break down how many commas there are so you see what I'm dealing with. There were indeed more than humans here. That fact was evident in the neat braided matting, in the bright painting which marched in alien geometrics and overlays about the walls, more of the spires, more of the wooden globes with the faces and huge eyes all about them, faces repeated in the carved furniture and even in the doors, staring out from a gnarled and tiny detail, as if all those eyes were to remind humans that down below was always with them. And now I'm going to read through it, including reference to all the punctuation used. There were indeed more than humans here, That fact was evident in, the neat braided matting, in the bright painting which marched in alien geometrics and overlays about the walls, more of the spires, more of the wooden globes with the faces and huge eyes all about them, faces repeated in the carved furniture and even in the doors, staring out from a gnarled and tiny detail, as if all those eyes were to remind humans that down below was always with them, period. It affected them all. Di swore softly before they walked up to the last doors and officious sieves let them in, walked with them into the council hall. Human faces stared at them this time, in 6 tiers of chairs on a side, an oval table in the pit between, their expressions and those of the alien carvings remarkably alike in that first impression. The white-haired man at the end of the table stood up, made a gesture offering them the room into which they had already come. Angelo Constantin. Others remained seated. And beside the table were 6 chairs which were not part of the permanent arrangement, and 6, male and female, who were not, by their style of dress, part of the station council or even of the beyond. Company men. Signy might have dismissed the troops to the outer chamber in courtesy to the council, rid herself of the threat of rifles and the remainder of force. She stood where she was, unresponsive to Constantine's smiles.
This can be short, she said. Your quarantine zone is set up and functioning. I'd advise you to guard it heavily. I'll warn you now that other freighters jumped without our clearance and made no part of our convoy. If you're wise, you'll follow the recommendations I made and board any incoming merchanter with security before letting it in near you. You've had a look at Russell's disaster here. I'll be pulling out in short order. It's your problem now.
There was a panicked muttering in the room. One of the company men stood up.
You've behaved very high-handedly, Captain Mallory. Is that the custom out here? The custom is, sir, that those who know a situation handle it, and those who don't watch and learn, or get out of the way.
The company man's thin face flushed visibly.
It seems we're constrained to bear with that kind of attitude, temporarily. We need transport up to whatever exists as a border. Norway is available.
Norway is available. She drew a sharp breath and drew herself up.
No, sir, you're not constrained, because Norway isn't available to sieve passengers, and I'm not taking any on. As for the border is wherever the fleet sits at the moment, and nobody but the ships involved know where that is. There aren't borders. Hire a freighter.
There was dead silence in the hall. I dislike, Captain, to use the word court-martial. She laughed, a mere breath.
If you company people want to tour the war, I'm tempted to take you in. Maybe you'd benefit by it. Maybe you could widen Mother Earth's sight. Maybe we could get a few more ships.
You're not in a position to make requisitions, and we don't take them. We're not here to see only what's determined we should see. We'll be looking at everything, Captain, whether or not it suits you. She set her hands on her hips and surveyed the lot of them.
Your name, sir?
Sigurd Ayres, of the Security Council, second secretary.
Second secretary. Well, we'll see what space we come up with. No baggage beyond a duffel. You understand that. No frills. You go where Norway goes. I don't take my orders from anyone but Mazian.
Captain, another put forth, your cooperation is earnestly requested.
You have what I'll give, and not a step further.
There was silence, a slow murmuring from the tears. The man Ayres's face The man Ayres's face reddened further, his precise dignity that instinctively galled her now further and further ruffled.
You're an extension of the company, Captain, and you hold your commission from it. Have you forgotten that?
Third captain of the fleet, Mr. Second Secretary, which is military, and you're not. But if you intend to come, be ready within the hour.
No, Captain, Ayres declared firmly. We'll take your suggestion about freighter transport. It got us here from Seoul. They'll go where they're hired to go.
Within reason, I don't doubt.
Good. That problem was shed. She could reckon Mazian's consternation at that in the midst of them. She looked beyond Ayres at Angelo Constantin.
I've done my service here. I'm leaving. Any message will be relayed.
Captain. Angelo Constantin left the head of the table and walked forward, offered his hand, an unusual courtesy, the stranger considering what she had done to them, leaving the refugees. She took the firm hand-clasp, met the man's anxious eyes. They knew each other, remotely, had met in years past. 6 generations beyonder, Angelo Constantin, like the young man who had come down to help on the dock, a 7th. The Constantins had built Pell, were scientists and miners, builders and holders. With this man and the others she felt a manner of bond, for all their other differences. This kind of man the fleet had for its charge, the best of them.
Good luck,
she wished them, and turned and left, taking Di and the troops with her. She returned the way she had come, through the beginning establishment of Q Zone, and back into the familiar environs of Norway, among friends, where law was as she'd laid it down, and things were as she knew. There were a few last details to work out, a few matters still to be arranged, a few last gifts to bestow on station. Her own security's dredgings, reports, recommendations, a live body, and what salvaged reports came with it. She put Norway on ready then, and the siren went, and what military presence Pell had for its protection slipped free and left them. She went to follow a sequence of courses which was in her head, and of which Graf knew her second. It was not the only evacuation in progress. The Paris station was under Kreshov's management. Sung of Pacific had moved in on Esperance. By now other convoys were on their way toward Pell, and she had only set up the framework. The push was coming. Other stations had died, beyond their reach, beyond any salvage. They moved what they could, making Union work for what they took. But in her private estimate they were themselves doomed, and the present maneuver was one from which most of them would not return. They were the remnant of a fleet, against a widespread power which had inexhaustible lives, and supply, and worlds, and they did not. After so long a struggle, her generation, the last of the fleet, the last of company power, she had watched it go, had fought to hold the two together, Earth and Union, humanity's past and future. Still fought with what she had, but no longer hoped. At times she even thought of bolting the fleet, of doing what a few ships had done and going over to Union. It was supreme irony that Union had become the pro-space side of this war, and the founding company fought against. Irony that they who most believed in the beyond ended up fighting against what it was becoming, to die for a company which had stopped caring. She was bitter. She had long ago stopped being politic in any discussion of company policies.
There had been a time, years ago, when she had looked differently on things, when she had looked as an outsider on the great ships and the power of them, and when the dream of the old exploration ships had drawn her into this, a dream long revised to the realities the company captain's emblem had come to mean. Long ago she had realized there was no winning. Perhaps, she thought, Angelo Constantin knew the odds too. Maybe he had taken her meaning, answered it behind the gesture of saying farewell, offered support in the face of company pressure. For a moment it had seemed so. Maybe many of the stationers knew, but that was too much to expect of stationers. She had 3 feints to make, which would take time, a small operation, and a jump afterward to rendezvous with Mazian on a certain date. If enough of their ships survived the initial operation, if Union responded as they hoped, it was madness. The fleet went it alone, without merchanter or stationer support, as they had gone it alone for years before this.
And that, I think, is where I will leave you for this Wednesday. A nice little taster, not a tremendously long installment, um, but it moves. It moves pretty quickly. We've got a lot going on here, basically. There's a lot to dissect. I mean, you get that little history lesson that's kind of explaining, hey, Earth is completely detached from the problem of uh, of how life people are living their lives in space. It really doesn't understand that Earth Company, particularly itself, does not really understand um, that everyone else that Earth isn't relevant anymore. Basically, for people living out there, they haven't really twigged to that. Union is expanding further and further and further, um, rapaciously, even one might say. Just ramped up. We'll definitely get a lot more information on what's going on with Union by the time we get to the book Citeen. Citeen is kind of the let's explain what Union's all about, what life in Union is like, and it's not quite the way it's being represented in this early section. But that's also taking place after certain events occur, so there's reasons for that. Um, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I give her a lot of credit for keeping all this in her head or written down, even just coming up with it all. It's brilliant. And this book kind of showcases tons of stuff around that. A lot of really clever ideas and cool concepts. So yeah, that'll do it for today. Next week we will read more of it. Going at about 40 to 50 pages at a whack or so. It's sort of what we're looking at. Hopefully people enjoyed. I'm sorry I'm stumbling on a bunch of it. Um, there are simple reasons for this. Namely that CJ Cherryh has a very particular cadence to her work and her writing style that is not always easy for me to get used to, especially since I haven't read anything by her recently. So I'm having to get into the groove. Um, but anyway, Nicole Berlino, thank you again, says, I didn't know how to pronounce her name back in the day either, and I forget too. I remember how I sounded it out when I read the book aloud IRL. Yeah, nice. Great. Um, yep. So yeah, no, thanks to everyone who's tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed. I think, I mean, really anything by her is worth reading. This is definitely one of her undisputed greats, mostly because there's just so much going on. It's like I'll happily rant and rave about how amazing Dune is in terms of here's an incredibly rich tapestry for setting, for everything going on, for all sorts of stuff occurring, um, which uh, I'm a proponent of. Like Dune is great, but the real full package is reading Dune through God Emperor is just like such a crazy ride. There's so much going on. There's so much depth going on. So much richness of setting, of interaction, of character. C.J. Cherryh in one book blows all that away. Like she is very high on my list. She does an absolutely phenomenal job of doing just raw, believable depth of her setting. Like she never particularly explains how does jump work. She describes the process once or twice, but it's like she's not like gonna get hung up on, oh, this is how the math works. This is what it's doing. That's basically a non-issue. It's about how do people live in the setting and what is the setting like? What is life like? What is life like living on a space station? What was life like if you're someone working in the asteroid belt? So it's there's a lot here. There's a lot here, and it's very utterly believable to me. It feels extremely lived in a way that most other authors could only hope to do. She's very good. Um, I gush, I gush. I really have to read some Octavia Butler on stream. She's Octavia Butler is another complete wizard of an author where it's just like, wow. There's a bunch of authors I can rave about pretty much nonstop. C.J. Cherryh is one of them. Frank Herbert's one of them. Um, and Octavia Butler is another. It's just all I'm saying is there's some great authors out there, and we're going to touch on some of them. That's kind of my hope. If I'm introducing you to some new author, great. If this is a retread for you, hopefully you find something new to get out of it. I know reading Frank Herbert's work, particularly with the Dune series, but also the Pandora sequence, going through the Pandora sequence, I've been getting something new out of that. CJ Cherryh is much the same way. Every time I read one of her books, I get something new out of it that I didn't really realize before. So she's just, I gush. I gush. She's very good. Um, anyway, with that, I'm going to run. Nothing really much further to relate. This Friday, we'll be reading through more of The Lazarus Effect. And next Monday, we'll start on the third book of the Full Metal Panic series, which is entitled something Blue, Trembling into the Blue. And it's more of a character-focused one, as I recall. Less focused on giant robot action. Um, Pretty good. It serves a purpose. It serves a purpose for fleshing things out. Anyway, thanks again. I'll see you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. See you all next time. Toodaloo. Oh, and I'll get the playlists updated this weekend, without fail. I didn't do it last weekend. I think partly because I wanted to have one in the pipe for Downbelow Station, so I can just set one up for that, not remember to do it later. Whatever. Anyway, until next time.